Before we begin, let me tell you, what you're about to hear is not just a story. It's a journey through something I never expected, something that changed my life forever. When my son walked through that front door after months away, I thought I was just getting a visit. But what he told me, what happened next, it unraveled everything I thought I knew, and it brought back emotions I hadn't felt in years. But you'll see. Tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from right now? I'd love to know where this story is reaching. And before we dive in, if you enjoy stories that touch the heart and stir the soul, go ahead and click that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot more than you think, and I'd love to have you with me for more. All right, let's start from the beginning. The wind was sharp that morning, rustling the golden leaves that had piled up along the edge of the driveway. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing out my coffee mug, still in my flannel robe, the radio humming quietly behind me. It was one of those quiet mornings you grow to love in your 40s and 50s. No noise, no rush, just the soft hush of fall and the warmth of home. I'd been alone in the house for nearly 8 months since my son Ryan had moved to another state for work. He was 27, young but not too young to know what he wanted. Or so I thought. So when I saw his car pull into the driveway unexpectedly, I blinked twice, heart skipping. He hadn't mentioned visiting. Not a call, not a message. I wrapped my robe tighter around me and stepped out onto the porch. The wind hit my face, and for a second it felt like time stopped. Ryan stepped out of the car, looking tired, maybe even older than when I'd last seen him. His hair had grown longer, a little messier than usual, and he had that look in his eyes, the one kids have when they're holding something back, something heavy. "Mom," he said, trying to smile. "Ryan?" I took a step forward. "What on earth? Are you okay?" He walked up and hugged me, tight. Not the usual pat on the back kind of hug. This one was long, real, like he needed it. I didn't ask questions right away. I knew better than to push. I just let him inside, made him coffee, and watched as he sat down at the kitchen table. The same table where we'd once done math homework, where I'd once taught him how to peel apples without breaking the skin. He glanced around the room like he was trying to anchor himself. And then he said it. "Mom, I have something to tell you. And it's going to sound strange." I didn't speak. I just waited. He took a deep breath, wrapped both hands around the warm mug, and looked up at me with those same hazel eyes he had as a child. "I found someone," he said. "Someone I didn't expect to find." I smiled, assuming he meant a woman. "That's wonderful, honey. You could have just said you had a girlfriend. You didn't need to make it sound like a secret." But he shook his head slowly. "It's not that. Well, it's more than that. It's not about a relationship. It's about something I learned. About us." My stomach turned. "Us," I repeated. He nodded. "There's something I found out about our family. About Dad." I sat down. Just like that, my hands went cold. My husband, Greg, had passed away 5 years ago. Car accident. Clean record. No scandals. No secrets. Or so I thought. Ryan reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. He slid it across the table. I picked it up with hesitant fingers, opened it, and stared at the letter. Handwritten, slanted cursive, an address in Tennessee, and at the bottom, a name I didn't recognize. "I got that through a DNA service," he said. "I wanted to learn more about Dad's side of the family. And I found out we're not who we thought we were. I didn't understand, I just kept staring at the letter, feeling the room around me spin just slightly. He leaned forward, quieter now. I found someone. A woman. Her name is Margaret. She lives out near Nashville. She knew Dad. A long time ago. Before you two met. My mouth felt dry. And she has a son. About my age. I looked up sharply. My mind started working fast, pieces clicking into place too quickly. You're telling me you have a half-brother. He nodded slowly. And Mom, she says Dad never told her he left. She thought he disappeared. I sat back in the chair. The heater hummed against the wall. Outside, a breeze kicked up leaves across the lawn. And just like that, the world I had carefully stacked together all these years cracked. I looked at my son, my whole world, and suddenly saw a piece of his life I'd never known was missing. What do you want to do? I finally asked, my voice quiet. I want to meet him, but I don't want to go alone. His eyes met mine. There was something raw in them. I want you to come with me. My chest tightened. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just sat there, listening to the wind outside, to the distant sound of a train horn far off in the hills. Because deep down I knew something had started that morning, and there would be no turning back. I didn't sleep much that night. The house, usually so familiar and comforting, suddenly felt like a stranger. Every creak in the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator, felt louder than usual, as if the walls themselves were waiting for me to react. Ryan had gone up to his old bedroom early. He said he was tired, but I think he just sensed I needed space. After he went upstairs, I stayed in the kitchen, the lights low, just me and that letter. I read it over and over, as if some hidden meaning might emerge the 10th time around. But it was simple. Too simple. A kind handwritten note from a woman who said she never stopped wondering what happened to Greg. She didn't ask for anything. No apology. No drama. Just a quiet hope to reconnect and to understand. There was something gentle about her words, which somehow made it harder to process. How do you grieve a version of someone you never knew existed? By morning, I was up before the sun. I made a full breakfast like I used to when Ryan was in high school. Eggs, sausage, toast, and coffee. He came downstairs wearing a soft old hoodie from college, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He smiled when he saw the spread. Wow, haven't seen this in years. I shrugged, flipping the eggs. Some things don't change. He sat at the table, tapping his fingers nervously against his mug. I could feel his eyes on me, waiting, wondering if I was angry, if I was hurt. Truth was, I didn't know how to feel. I'm not mad, I said finally, placing the plate in front of him. He looked up. You sure? No, I said. But I'm not mad at you. That much I'm sure of. He gave a half laugh, more of a sigh really, and picked at his food. After a long pause, I said, You really want to do this? Drive to Tennessee? He looked me square in the eyes. Yeah, I do, but only if you're okay with it. I took a sip of my coffee. It had gone lukewarm, but I barely noticed. I think I need to see it for myself, I said. Not just for you, but for me. We left the next morning. I packed a small overnight bag and threw in a scarf Greg had given me years ago. A silly thing, maybe, but it felt right to bring a piece of him. I wasn't sure if I was chasing closure or just trying to understand what part of him lived in that other world. The drive took us most of the day. The hills rolled by, painted with early fall colors, burnt orange, deep red, soft gold. The radio played quietly in the background, mostly oldies, the kind that bring back memories without warning. We didn't talk much, but it wasn't awkward. There was a quiet comfort between us, like we both knew words couldn't quite cover what was happening. Just outside of Nashville, the GPS directed us down a narrow country road lined with sycamore trees and scattered barns. The air felt different, warmer, somehow, softer. Eventually, we pulled into a gravel driveway. A small farmhouse sat at the end of it, modest but well kept. There were flower beds along the porch, a wind chime dancing in the breeze, and a red rocking chair by the door. Ryan parked the car and turned to me. "We can leave any time. You said the word, and we're gone." I looked at him and nodded, but I didn't move to open the door. It took me a moment. I needed one more breath. Then the front door opened. A woman stepped out. She looked to be about my age. Her hair was shoulder-length, silver streaked through sandy brown. She wore jeans and a cream-colored sweater, and though she looked surprised, she smiled with something close to relief. "Ryan," she said, stepping forward. He got out of the car and waved awkwardly. "Hi, Margaret." They hugged briefly, and then her eyes shifted to me. "You must be his mother," she said gently. I stepped out, clutching my purse a little too tightly. "Yes, I'm Elaine." Margaret nodded. There was no judgment in her eyes, just a quiet understanding, the kind that comes from carrying something too long. "I made some tea," she said. "Would you both like to come in?" Inside, the house was filled with light. Big windows let the sunshine pour across polished wood floors. The smell of cinnamon lingered in the air. There were family photos on the walls, some new, some clearly old, and one caught my eye. A younger Greg, maybe in his 20s, standing next to Margaret. I walked toward it slowly, my breath caught. He looked so familiar, and yet like someone else entirely. Margaret noticed. "That was taken the year before he left," she said softly. "I didn't ask why he left. I didn't ask if he said goodbye. Part of me didn't want to know. Not yet. Instead, I turned to her and said, 'Did he ever tell you about me?' She shook her head. I didn't even know he'd died until last year. I thought he just disappeared." Ryan sat at the table, listening quietly. Margaret poured the tea. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "He was kind, a good man when I knew him. But he was restless, always looking out the window like he was meant to be somewhere else." I sat down slowly. The chair creaked under me, but I barely noticed. For the next hour, we talked. Not about anger, not about betrayal, but about Craig. About how two women could love the same man at different times and still somehow find peace in the pieces he left behind. Eventually, she called out down the hallway, "Caleb, honey, come meet someone." Footsteps, and then a young man entered, tall, with the same eyes as Ryan. And just like that, the room changed. Because it wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about what came next. I don't remember exactly how long I stared at him. Caleb. He stepped into the room with the kind of quiet confidence I'd only ever seen in Ryan when he was little and had just done something he was proud of, built a Lego tower, helped with the groceries, passed a math test. There was something familiar in the way Caleb stood, hands in his pockets, shoulders just slightly hunched, like he wasn't used to being the center of attention. But it wasn't just resemblance. It was more than that. It was knowing. He looked at Ryan first, They both nodded at each other, like strangers, but not quite. There was something unspoken in the air, and it wasn't just curiosity. It was this strange electric stillness, like when a storm hasn't started yet, but the air feels heavy with it. Margaret smiled gently and gestured toward him. "Caleb, this is Ryan, and this is Elaine." I smiled, doing my best to stay calm, but my hands were trembling just slightly under the table. Caleb extended his hand toward me. "Nice to meet you, ma'am." "Ma'am." The word made me blink back something I hadn't expected. He had Greg's tone in his voice, low, steady, polite to a fault. "Nice to meet you too, Caleb," I said, shaking his hand. Ryan stood then, and the two young men looked at each other for a moment longer than necessary. I think they were both trying to find the right words. But how do you speak to someone who's supposed to be part of you, but you've never met? "I've seen pictures," Caleb said finally. "From the site. You look like him." Ryan gave a small smile. "You too." And just like that, the tension broke, just a little. We all sat back down, and Margaret brought out a plate of oatmeal cookies, the kind with raisins, and just a hint of spice. The smell reminded me of holidays when Ryan was little, of times before life became so complicated. We talked for a while. It was mostly small talk at first, what Ryan did for work, how Caleb had grown up out here in the country, what it was like living in two different worlds without knowing it. But eventually, the conversation turned. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her fingers wrapped around her mug. "There was always a part of me that knew something wasn't right," she said. "After Greg left, I waited. For years. I used to sit on the porch every Sunday, just watching the road." She looked at me then, not accusing, just honest. "I didn't know he'd started another life. I didn't know he had a son. Or you." I nodded slowly. "Didn't know about you either. He never said a word." "I believe that," she said. "I don't think he meant to hurt either of us. I just think maybe he didn't know how to be in one place." It was a strange kind of grief we shared, me and Margaret. Not the sharp, fresh pain of losing someone suddenly. No, this was the slow ache of realizing someone you loved was never entirely yours. We sat in silence for a moment. The only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock behind us. Caleb cleared his throat. "I always wondered why he left. You know? I'd ask Mom, and she'd just say he had to go. I used to imagine all sorts of things. Maybe he was a soldier. Maybe he was undercover or something dramatic like that." Ryan gave a soft laugh. "Yeah, my dad was an accountant. No secret missions there." They both chuckled, and for a moment it felt like we'd all known each other longer than a single afternoon. After a while, Margaret excused herself to take a call. Ryan and Caleb walked outside to sit on the porch. And I stayed in the kitchen, sipping lukewarm tea, staring at that photograph on the wall again. That version of Greg, so young, smiling, his arm around a woman I'd never known existed. It was surreal, like looking into someone else's life through a window, and realizing they had windows of their own looking back. Margaret returned and sat beside me, quiet for a moment. "I used to be angry," she said softly. "At him. At myself? At the world?" I nodded. "Me too. For different reasons, maybe. But yes." She looked out the window, watching the boys talk on the porch. "Do you think they'll stay in touch?" "I don't know," I said truthfully. "But I hope they do." The sun began to dip behind the hills, casting a soft amber glow across the living room. The shadows grew longer, the light warmer, and something shifted in me. I realized, sitting there in that small farmhouse with the scent of cinnamon and the echoes of a shared past, that this wasn't about discovering a secret. It was about healing the parts of ourselves we didn't even know were wounded. When we left later that evening, Margaret walked us to the car. She hugged Ryan tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding us." She turned to me then, and this time, when she hugged me, it wasn't awkward or hesitant. It was the kind of hug only two women who had both loved and lost the same man could understand. We said our goodbyes, and as we pulled out of the driveway, I looked back one more time. Margaret and Caleb stood in the glow of the porch light, framed by the warmth of a home that had once been built on hope and uncertainty. Ryan was quiet as we drove. About an hour down the road, he finally spoke. "Do you think Dad knew we'd find out one day?" I thought for a moment, then said, "I think part of him hoped we wouldn't, but another part of him might have wished for it." He nodded, resting his head back against the seat. "He would have liked Caleb," Ryan said. "I think he would have," I agreed. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like something was being put back together, not perfectly, not neatly, but honestly. Because families aren't always what we expect. Sometimes they come with sharp edges and missing pieces. But sometimes, in the quiet spaces between heartbreak and healing, we find something stronger than we ever imagined. We find each other. It was 2 weeks before I really let myself feel it. The trip to Tennessee had stirred something inside me, a quiet reckoning I hadn't expected. Life doesn't usually come back around to offer explanations. But somehow, this time, it had. Back home, the days went on as usual. Leaves thickened on the lawn, needing raking. The kettle whistled every morning like it always had. But everything felt different, not in a loud way, in that soft, internal way that only the heart notices. Ryan had gone back to his apartment a few towns over, but he called more often now. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. We talked more like equals these days. I think he saw me differently now, less as just Mom, and more as someone with her own chapters, her own past. Funny how much you can learn about yourself when you see your story reflected through someone else's eyes. A week after the visit, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten, neat cursive, from Margaret. She wrote to thank me for coming, for sitting with her in that kitchen and not turning away. She said it had given her something she never knew she needed: peace, closure, a sense that she hadn't been forgotten. At the bottom of the note she wrote, "We can't go back and rewrite the past, but we can tell the truth going forward, and maybe that's how we heal." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer where I keep old postcards and birthday cards from Ryan's childhood. The things that matter most don't always make noise. Sometimes they just wait for the right moment to be held. 2 days later, Ryan showed up again. No call this time. Just that same sound of gravel under tires in the driveway and his familiar knock on the door. When I opened it, he stood there with 2 suitcases and a look in his eye I hadn't seen since he was a boy needing reassurance. "I took some time off," he said. "I thought maybe we could drive back down. Together." I blinked. "To see Caleb?" He nodded. "Yeah, but not just that. I've been talking to him a lot. On the phone. We get along, Mom. Like, really get along. It's weird. I didn't think it would feel this natural." I smiled, stepping aside to let him in. "That's not weird at all. That's family." He looked around the house. "Do you think you're ready to go back?" I thought about it. The truth was, didn't know what ready looked like anymore. But I knew I wanted to. I wanted to keep walking forward, even if the path felt new. "Give me 20 minutes, I said. "I'll pack a bag." The second trip to Tennessee felt different. There wasn't a storm of emotion or uncertainty, just a steady quiet, a sense of purpose. Margaret welcomed us like old friends this time. She'd set out a pie on the kitchen counter, apple with a flaky crust just like the kind my own mother used to make. Caleb pulled into the driveway shortly after, and when he saw us, he smiled without hesitation. Ryan clapped him on the back, easy now, as if they'd known each other forever. That night we sat out on the back porch under the stars, the 4 of us. The crickets were loud, and a gentle wind moved through the trees. It was one of those rare nights where time feels like it pauses just long enough for you to notice the beauty in the moment. Margaret turned to me as the conversation grew quiet. "I think they're going to be all right," she said, nodding toward the boys. "I think so too," I whispered. Then, after a pause, I added, "It's strange, isn't it? How something so broken can still become something whole." She smiled. "Not strange, just human." The next morning, we went for a walk through the fields behind her house. Caleb showed us the old barn where he used to play. Ryan listened with genuine interest, laughing at the stories like he'd missed out on a cousin's childhood, now being told in fast forward. Later, they played a game of catch with an old baseball they found in the shed. I watched them from the porch, 2 grown men, throwing and laughing like boys. And it hit me then, in the quietest way possible. Love doesn't always arrive on time. Family doesn't always follow the rules. And sometimes the people who belong in your life don't arrive until you're ready to see them. When we said goodbye again, it wasn't as visitors. It was as family. As we got in the car, Margaret hugged me tightly and said, "Come back any time. You have a place here now." I nodded, holding her hand for an extra second. "So do you." The drive home was filled with music and soft conversation. Ryan told me Caleb had invited him to come back for a weekend camping trip in October. I told him he absolutely should go. As we passed the Tennessee state line, I looked out the window and felt something inside me shift. Not a dramatic moment, but a settling. I hadn't just gone on a trip. I'd walked through the fog of uncertainty and come out on the other side with something unexpected. A new branch on our family tree. A new understanding of the past. And perhaps most of all, a deeper connection to my son. It wasn't the kind of ending I'd imagined when I first heard Greg's name in Margaret's kitchen. But it was real. It was honest. And it was ours. In the end, maybe that's all any of us are really looking for. Not perfect answers, but real ones. Not polished endings, but truthful new beginnings. And in that truth, I found something I didn't even know I was still looking for. Hope. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If it touched you in any way, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you haven't already, go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel. I've got more stories waiting, stories about life, about love, about rediscovery, just like this one. We're never too old to be surprised by life. And sometimes the biggest surprises bring us home.